Welcome to our January 2023. I hope you had a lovely holiday and break and were able to switch off over the holiday periods. So welcome back and thanks for joining us this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on the timescales. So the session for today is we're really looking at how we can help you get your maturity model for Microsoft 365 Journey up and running, talk about what some of the things we're doing, and get some feedback into there. So let's get started first. So we of course will give you a overview of what we've been up to and what we've got planned for this year, and how you can contribute as well and get involved, and then we'll go into our content for today's session. So if anyone hasn't got this, I guess we're sort of kind of telling the wrong people here, but here's how to get access to the calendar invite through this URL here. And we will share that in the chat. We're here every month. So since we last met you all in November, we've kind of been doing a lot of thinking and talking about what we're going to be up to in 2023. So we've got we've got these various tools around running a Microsoft 365 workshop. We've got our practitioner meeting recordings, but the purpose of the maturity model is to help organizations kind of navigate their way through getting more value out of the Microsoft 365 platform. The maturity model itself is technology agnostic, and you could apply it to other lesser technologies if you so wished. But the idea is it's to allow organizations to understand where they should focus, where the benefits they would get from focusing on core competencies, which every business needs to be able to do, and to various degrees of competency. So being able to communicate, being able to collaborate, being able to have somewhere to store your content and manage that content. So we've got those, 10 competencies in there, and there's more coming along. The area of focus, especially with all the exciting things going on with Microsoft Viva, is around employee experience. So we're starting to start to think about that more, and we would definitely love people's input on that. So when we get to chatting later on, it'd be great to kind of hear your thoughts on that as well. But let's move to the next slide. So the maturity model, it has 5 levels of maturity, starting from level 1 up to level 500. And level 1 is that sort of chaotic default state which an organization would have when they're switching on their competency. So maybe when you first set up Microsoft 365, you'll have an initial level, and it's uncontrolled, it's chaotic. Then as we're kind of looking to improve things, get a bit better, then we move into level 200 manage, where things become a bit more routine. We've got a bit more process around how we achieve things, but it's not rolled out across the organization, and there's still firefighting going on. Level 300 is kind of what we see as our default level. This is a great place to be. We've defined our policies, our processes, and things are a bit more controlled, and they're stable across the organization. And from level 300 we move to level 400, where we have this predictable stage, where really what we're doing here is we're starting to introduce measurement. We're measuring the things which we're doing, measuring how the value we're getting from the various competencies, so that we can then decide what action to take next. And then moving on from level 400 to level 500 is where we are kind of at that nirvana state, and we are everything is automated, and we can sit back and concentrate on the really important stuff in the business. And as we move from those levels 1 to 500, we move from kind of more into sort of from process and people, into people and culture, and it's sort of driving that culture as we move up to level 400 and 500 within the organization. Right, okay. So we're going to have a go at turning the PMP Picture Time. Just for your knowledge, I've never done this before, so we'll give it a go. So what I'm going to do, I shall stop that. I will, if everyone can switch their cameras on, and I will put it into together mode.
We need everybody to turn their cameras on because we never get enough people. We want to prove to people that we got
Turn them on.
good
Turn them on.
attendance. Come on, we all want to see whether you have bookshelves behind you or not.
Exactly.
Or Millennial Falcons.
Or Millennium Falcons, yeah. So if everyone could, I'm going to start recording now. So if everyone could do a wave and say hello, that'd be fantastic.
Happy New Year, everybody. Hello.
Let me try that again. I actually have to hit record. Sorry, apologies. We'll have it one more time.
You don't
It's still going.
You don't need to record. Just switch to together mode, and David will clip it out.
All right, fantastic. Yeah. All right, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
So switch. No, you need to switch to together mode. That's the missing piece here.
Yeah.
Oh, I am in together mode.
Oh.
Presenting it though,
okay.
because then it'll be in that recording. Yeah.
Let me do that. Double error.
Let's try one more time.
Let's do that again. Third time.
Take two. Well, see, this gives more people time to get on their video.
Excellent.
Can you?
Yes.
There we go.
There you go.
Fantastic.
Hello.
This technology thing, you know.
Right. Our maturity is not high.
No. All right, let's get back to the presentation. Thank you very much. Right, so next step. So we'd like you to get involved and contribute in 2023. Please raise your hand. So if you want to say something, but clap, applaud, laugh, whatever you'd like to do. And please, use your camera, share your camera. Please don't be shy and come off mute to share your thoughts.
So one of the pieces we got of feedback from last year was we present this slide very often and we talk about getting involved, and you can see across the bottom we have our 4 boxes where we invite people to present a case study, contribute on GitHub, provide feedback, or socialize content. But some of this green field can actually be a little bit intimidating, and sometimes people do not know exactly where to get involved. So there was a request to have maybe more specific gap areas so people can opt in. Now, what we're about to walk through next is not meant to be a limitation or a barrier to contributing other additional new content. This is just some of what we're thinking that we're going to focus on this year. Wanted to highlight to all of you as well. So it is a roadmap for our maturity model. So if you hop to the next slide, Simon, we're going to first start talking about present a case study. So that is in this meeting itself. We do meet once monthly. We have a couple of sessions that we cancel in the summer and the winter for break time. But you can see here what we have outlined so far is what we are thinking about talking about and covering for the next year. So next month, for example, we want to have a discussion-based session focusing on what is the difference between employee experience and what we have in one of our competencies right now for staff and training. Hopefully this discussion will help generate a lot of content for us to then build some competencies or practical scenarios around Viva, and then we will be presenting and discussing that content in May. So if you want to be involved in that part of the conversation, highly recommend joining in February, join the conversation then, maybe even sign up to be part of the articles. Now, across this content schedule as well, you'll see we are also calling out where we have our featured speakers. We love having people outside of the core team come to these meetings and participate. So if you're interested in any of these topics, please don't hesitate to let us know. And we would love to have you join us. So for example, you can see we're going to be talking a little bit about Loop in one of the coming months, and then we're going to have Daryl Webster as our guest. So for anyone interested in joining either to present a topic, you'll see we do have a couple of months open. We have March and November open. We don't have topics yet. So if you have a request for a topic, proposal for a topic, or want to be involved in speaking, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Now, taking a peek at the next slide, another way that you can get involved is to contribute on GitHub. So we have a couple of different ways. I don't see that reflected yet.
There we go.
Okay.
There.
So one of the first things that we're going to be doing is reviewing and refining the articles. So you can see we have a couple framed out there in orange. Those are the ones that are very specifically tied to upcoming maturity model practitioner sessions. So these are guaranteed in scope that this team is going to be reviewing and focusing on this year. Now, if we go to the next slide, of course, we are also going to be expanding the current artifacts. So far, these are the items that we have outlined that we know that we want to expand on. Again, this isn't a limitation of what can be added to the model. This is just what we're focusing on as a core team for this year. But again, we invite anyone to be involved either on these exact articles or additional items. So if we continue to the next slide, just a reminder that we also have a very wide audience. So right now, all of our articles are in English, but if we have anyone that speaks multiple languages and is interested in helping us translate some of the existing content, we're always looking for help there to make sure that this maturity model transcends languages and regions. Now, looking at our next slide for contribute on GitHub. Whoops. I guess I spoke over it. Just wanted to call out that, of course, you can review any article at any point in time. So continuing on now to providing feedback, insights, tools, and artifacts. This does seem pretty vague. Of course, that is in reference to all of those articles that we just talked about, but we have a couple of different ways that you can get involved as well. We have the maturity model self-assessment. This will help you see where you are, but it also helps add to our pool of data so we can start to gather trends of where people are in their maturity model across industries. So of course, you can do that in the survey as well. And then at any point, if you don't want to write articles, but maybe you want to drive some discussions around this, or you want to join in the discussions informing those articles being written, we have those all available in GitHub to be part of those conversations as well. Continuing on to the next slide. We also always call out the idea that you can socialize the content. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
There
must be a lag. Sorry.
There is. No worries. I need 14 and we're on 15.
You need 14. Okay. I was on
Yes,
14.
please. Thank you so much. It wasn't loading on my side. Okay.
Sorry.
So no worries. So for socialized content, we just want to call out that there's a couple of different reasons that we ask for this. We all have different networks. So the people that I am working with are inherently going to be different than the network of who you are working with. So if this is something that you find useful, you socializing will reach a different audience than who I'm able to reach. So us socializing this model, of course, then also brings other community members who may be interested in contributing to it as well. So we really appreciate any time you can help us raise awareness around this, as well as some of the understanding and expand who's in these sessions as well. So in these practitioner sessions, we can have really rich conversations around these different topic areas. All of that said, thank you again for everyone who comes monthly. Our next session is going to be February 21st. Again, more discussion based around employee experience and staff versus training. And with that, I will close out on our highlight of ways to contribute. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us in the chat here. I'll catch up on anything I missed. Of course, you can reach out to us on Twitter and as well in our GitHub repo. Any of those areas will grab you and bring you into the maturity model family.
You're all part of the family, even though you may not have joined the family yet.
Right, I think I'm up next. So what we haven't really done, because I'm recognising that there's quite a few new faces attending this year, being a new year and everything. I think maybe it's worth quickly just introducing the core team. I know it's not on the slide deck, but I think it's probably valid. But Emily, since you were just talking, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? So just do a quick run around the team.
Sure. So Emily Mancini, I'm a principal architect at Sympraxis Consulting. I focus on user experience.
Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon Weaver. I own Smarter Consulting, which is an IT consulting firm. I'm also a Microsoft Regional Director and an MCT, so I basically help people figure out how to use Microsoft.
Simon.
Hi there, how are we doing? Simon Dory, owner of iThink 365, also an MVP recently, and yeah, I just like playing with Microsoft 365 and Azure. That's what I do with my team.
Marc, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Marc Anderson, and I'm also part of Sympraxis Consulting along with Emily. And I've been consulting on this platform for longer than some of you have been alive, I think. I actually love everything about this community and this platform. So, working on this maturity model is actually a great joy. It's a great team, and hopefully we're providing some stuff that is valuable to all of you folks.
And last and debatably least, I'm Simon Hudson. I'm also an MVP. And I have two companies, one of which is a small Microsoft consultancy, and the other is actually a medical technology company, so not so much tech. So there we go, that's us. But to summarize some of the things that Emily was saying, we would love it if you want to get involved. Attending these sessions is terrific, but if you want to take it to the next level and help us out with any of the things that Emily spoke about, whether that's giving us feedback, helping with the translations, and thank you for that, Thomas, that was useful. German is definitely a target language. Getting involved in helping us write some of the competencies or the other documentation that we're working on, please let us know. We're very accepting team, and we love to bring people back into helping us with this stuff because we don't know it all. Right. In Emily's section, you saw briefly the roadmap for what we want to try and do over the course of 2023 in terms of the maturity model development and the practitioner sessions. But what we'd like to do for the rest of today's session is think about your roadmap, not ours. And your roadmap is really about how do you take all of these artifacts and this increasingly heavy set of tools that the maturity model provides, and in a programmatic or at least thoughtful way, introduce those into your organization. So that's what I'm going to try and do. And if I've done this right, I've taken on sharing, and you should now see the road mapping your M365 journey for 2023. Thank you for that. Always good to get feedback, and this is why we like video. Right, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking this through. One of the things that we realized towards the end of last year was that we've done a lot of stuff. And it's easy for us. We're deeply embedded in it, and we can talk different competencies and different levels and different all that kind of stuff. We can talk it with a certain amount of confidence. But there's a lot of it. And if you guys want to go and take that into your organization, or if you're a consultant and want to take it into another organization, there is this question about how do you start that process? And is there an easy way of guiding yourself in? Do you just grab one of the competencies and go as far as you can with that? Or do you try and do a sort of broad-based approach? So what we've done is had a crack at providing a straw man. That's an English phrase. I don't know if it translates outside of England, but anyway, a sort of a prototype or a template for how you might try and take a first step across a broad base. So this is using multiple competencies, getting up to what we would consider a acceptable minimum level across multiple competencies, and do that. And then what does the next step look like, and the next? It's not definitive. So you need to mold it to do what you need to do in your organization with your culture. But this is what we're going to try and show you for this next 20 minutes or whatever we have, just to give you a sense of how you might go about doing this whole thing. And of course, like good consultants that we sometimes are, the first thing that you should always do is understand where you are. Figure out your current state in the organization or your client organization. And that might be because you've already got some tooling, or it might be some workshopping, or it might just be because you're the boss and you've decided that that's where you are. I don't care what your mechanism is, but I recommend it's a robust one. And then, having figured out your current state and probably given some thought to your organizational strategy, more on that in a minute, decide what the goals are for your individual competencies. Now, we've got some fancy radar graphs. I'm going to show you those, or radar plots. I'm going to show you those in a bit more detail in due course. But essentially, we've got each of the different competencies that currently make up the maturity model. And our suggestion is you need to think about where do you need to be at the end of phase one of this rollout of the competency across the organization for each of those competencies. And some of them, this is the warning, some of them are going to be down at the level 100. It's okay to be rubbish at stuff because you can't be great at everything straight away. So accept that that you're going to do it a bit at a time. Get the things that are important to you as an organization up to adequate, and let the things that you can live with a bit of chaos in stay where they are for now, because it's better to do that than fail at everything all at once. Let's get some things good and leave some stuff where it is. So decide on the goals, and maybe some stretch goals. If you could really hit it, where would you get to in this first phase? And create a plan, because without a plan, how do you know if you're on plan or not? Right, I wonder if this works. That does not. I'll have to revert to using the mouse. So in pragmatic terms, that means thinking about which areas of your business, such as collaboration, content management, business process, infrastructure, governance, risk and compliance, and there's many of these things, as you'll know if you've looked at the competency models. Which of these are going to be the most important to you, where you're going to put your effort, and then spend some time reading through the ones you're going to go with first. And I'm just going to say it again. You probably can't do them all at once. Don't care how big and sophisticated and clever your organization is. If you've got more than a handful you're trying to do at once, you've got too many. So pick a small handful, maybe a pinch, and then make sure you drive into some of those competencies and decide what level you're already at. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do that. In a previous session, we've talked about a workshopping tool. There is a link to that within the Microsoft Learn environment, and we can share it again. There's a workshopping tool and some stuff to help you run your own organizational workshops to eke this stuff out. But there are lighter ways of doing it. It might be enough that you just sit down and you read a competency, and you start at the top, level 500, and you go, we're nowhere near that. Level 400, we're nowhere near that. Level 300, a couple of parts of the organization are doing some of that quite well. Level 200, oh, most of the organization is kind of okay at that. And when you find that level where you go, yeah, we think that we're doing this much pretty much well across the organization, but we're not at that level above, that's where you stop. And that's the baseline for that particular competency. And you do that across the handful of competencies you want to look at, and that's going to be your starting point for your plan. And the stuff we're going to show you in a minute. Yeah, fire away, Marc.
Can I just jump in there for a second? I've described it as that second bullet for a while now, and I think it feels a little loosey-goosey to a lot of people. How could we look at our competencies and just sort of what feels right? A lot of this is subjective. So if you read down the from level 100 to 200 to 300, and you start reading things where you're just, I don't think we do this very well, then you're level 200. And then the tricky part is, how do you explain that up the chain? How do you convince, your EVP or your CEO or whoever that you're actually at that level? You may have to ask them to do the same thing. Read level 300 and you tell me if we think we're there. And so it that's all good, because it actually fosters a lot of good conversation. And that's what really drives a lot of the change here.
Absolutely. And I go on about this particular aspect a lot. You may have some parts of your organization who are absolutely shit hot at some of this stuff. But if the overall organization isn't, you've still got some work to do. It's no good having a fantastic legal department if your operations is sucking, or whatever that needs to be. And it's okay for an organization. In fact, an organization should not be homogenous. You're going to have pockets of excellent and pockets of not so good, and different competencies are going to be differently important. The trick is to look at the criteria for each level, for each competency, and just take a pragmatic view on, are we really like that? Are we better than that? Or are we not as good as that? And go to a reasonable lowest common denominator. Cool. Right. So that's where you get your baseline. And so I didn't realize we had this animation. Emily, you did a great job there. I wish I'd known. So there we go. But then you start to think about what that maturity is going to look like over time. So the trick is to not just fix the organization, because that's never going to happen. The trick is to have a plan where we go from here to the next step, and from the next step to the next base if you're playing one of those strange American games. And just keep getting better. And bear in mind, the organization and your environment will keep changing. So things will fall back or suddenly leap ahead, and you need to accommodate that. And if you're really into it, you can maybe do some kind of gap analysis and figure out, we're here, we really need to be right up here. We probably can't do that in a single step, but what would we have to do if we did? And see if you can sell that up the chain to management to get the appropriate resources. So it's about building a plan and then monitoring the plan as you action it. Right.
And Simon, I'll make a quick comment. I want to make a quick comment on your last slide. So, I think one of the things in this particular section, the biggest thing I hear from people is, this is all fantastic and great, but my organization doesn't want to invest in, doing these things to make it better or to look at these assessments or things like that. And I think the key is, there was one on the slide right previous to this that said it should align with your organizational goals. So one of the things to remember is most large organizations every year have business initiatives. And if you're struggling with, maybe getting somebody to listen, to look at your maturity levels and to work on your maturity levels, look at those business initiatives and how could this maturity assessment process assist in those business initiatives, because that's where you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck, is going back to those initiatives and saying, if we tie this together with this, we can then meet our initiative in a better way. So just wanted to add that I saw the bullet point on there, and I think that's a really good way if you're trying to get somebody to focus on this, tie it back to your business initiatives.
Yeah, it's what's already going on that you can hook into. Sometimes people say they can't afford something. It's like, yeah, but we're already doing this. We could do it better.
And the competency models provide you a framework for what better looks like. Right, super. Thanks for that, Sharon. There's my mouse gone. There it is. Right, so we've built your tool, which we'll share in due course. It looks quite a lot like the workshopping tool that we used, but there are some differences. So this is a straw man, a default position for what you might want to have as your targets for each level. And we recommend you change it to meet your needs. I'll talk about that in a sec, but let's just have a look at what we've got here. This would be, we're just starting out on this journey and we need to try and get to a level of adequacy. And in order to be adequate, we need to have our content management and maybe a bit of collaboration working moderately well. So we've called this content adequacy, and we'd like to get the organization to be adequate with the way it manages content. And for that, we're just going to try and get management and content in the maturity model up to level 300, and we'll be content if the others are maybe down at 100. We've made some tweaks to this, as you'll see when we share the actual document. We think to do this, you need to improve your collaboration. So we're going to try and drive that up to a 200 mark. We think the staffing and training needs to be at least moderately okay, and you need to have vaguely adequate infrastructure, because if you don't have things like infrastructure, staff training, collaboration working, you're probably not going to get your content management right either. And so you set that out, figure out using each model, each competency, what you need to do to get there, set out a plan, go and action your plan, maybe get some back up, some air cover, as they say, from your senior management to make it happen. That's level 100. Level 200 then, sorry, phase 2 would, okay, it's really confusing, all these different levels. Phase 2 would be, okay, we now want to try and get to a reasonable level of productivity, what we've called productivity adequacy. And so we're okay, our management of content's working okay, but our collaboration needs to improve. We need to get a bit better at communication. We need to start making search work because we can't find the stuff that we need to be productive around, etc., etc. And so we then set up this level and we'd work on that. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but you see the idea that for each phase of work to introduce a model, you lay out your numbers, you work them. When you're more or less there, you look at the next level up and start working towards that. So, a couple of things about that. Whatever you choose as those numbers, first of all, don't be ridiculously ambitious because I'll just break you. Be pragmatic and sensible. But as Sharon was saying, make sure that they tie into your strategic objectives or your organizational objectives, partly because A, that's how you're going to drag the management to support you, and B, because that's kind of what you should be doing. It's no good saying we're going to become absolutely fantastic at customization and development if customization and development is not part of your strategic plan for the year. Maybe the organization's really worrying about its organizational culture. And that's where you should be pushing the numbers up a bit higher than our default straw man model here. There's something else we want to talk to you about as well. If you're in a compliance-driven organization. So I mentioned I have a medical device company, a medical technology company. We're exposed to a whole bunch of compliance, risk, and governance stuff. You need to make sure maybe in that kind of organization, your GRC, governance, risk, and compliance score, is better than just barely adequate. So so tweak this according to your rules, your business, your objectives, and your industry. But this gives you a bit of a model to go at about how we think a stepwise approach to introducing the various competencies might look. And again, this last bullet point, the trick here is to go from sufficient, then up to good, then to great. You don't have to be great at everything straight away. In fact, you can't be great at everything. You can't even be good at everything straight away. So, getting to sufficient and covering your arse is probably enough for the first few steps. Oh, interesting question. We probably ought to write a blog about this. I'll add that to my list of blogs I haven't written yet.
I could watch this video.
That's also a good thing. Right. Let me just remind myself, what were we going to say here? Who wants to remind?
Yeah, so this
Marc,
was around.
This
was around the missions, wasn't it? The mission statement. What is we trying to achieve with these competencies? Marc, I'll let you take over from that.
Yeah. So and this is along the lines of the where do we start? What makes sense for our organization? And we've been putting caveats around everything we're talking about today because it varies based on your organization, your size, your competency level, all that stuff. Given all of that, if you have a mission statement that says, or a strategy document that everyone's aware of, and that mission statement says we're going to be the low-cost provider for something, then probably infrastructure is really, really important, right? You need to have transactions just sailing through things. You need to make sure, your foundational layer is the best it can be. And these are really illustrative, but they're a way for you to start thinking about, how do we frame which competencies are the most important to us as an organization? If the mission statement says we're going to have the best place to work, then employee experience is clearly very important. So maybe that's one that you should start with. If your mission statement says something about operational elegance, excellence, or elegance, if you're going to dress up nicely, business process is probably something that you should think about putting in there first. Lots of times people come in with a model like this thinking that, because they need to solve an immediate problem. So maybe it's not in the mission statement, but something is on fire, right? So do you all of a sudden realize that you're going to be audited for something and you don't know if you're compliant with your document management, then content management of content is going to be first on your list. So always try to find those hooks. Like I said before, where can we hook into something that already has been expressed as an imperative for our organization by the people who run it, because you want their ownership into your attempts to improve your competencies. If you just sort of come at it from left field and it's not connected to anything else that's going on, then you've got a much steeper hill to climb to try to convince people that it should be part of their daily effort. It should be part of maybe a budget that you need to get sign off on. Or if you do find these hooks, you may be able to sort of tailgate onto existing efforts that are already going on, that are already being paid for. And that's all I have to say about that.
Cool.
So should we move on to the next slide?
Yep.
I can pick up on this. It has changed a little bit since I last saw it, but so where do we start? That we talk about that content adequacy, and one of the things I say, we are trying to be quite opinionated, because in that way we get something, a line in the sand, don't we, which we can kind of work on, and people can then argue with us about whether this is right or not. But so if you don't really know where to start, this is sort of a safe approach. We need to have a level of infrastructure in place. So we need to have, our identity and those areas sorted out. There needs to be a base level of governance. So, having two-factor authentication, MFA, having controls around how SharePoint sites and teams are created, looking at what is it that you have to do as well, to meet the legal and regulatory requirements of your organization in the country that you are within, or countries. The third part is, if you don't invest in staffing and training, these tools are just not going to get used. People are going to go off and do their own thing. So you need to have investment in there. And this is bone of contention. Where do we start with collaboration, getting people to use the tools so that they've got, again, this comes into management of content as well. They've got places where they can collaborate. So we've got Microsoft Teams areas. You've got workspaces where these people can engage and work together. You've got, areas where projects can run. But if you don't have, and then the final thing is, if you don't have your content in the platform, then you're really missing out on the value. You can't sort of achieve what organizations, I think, should be able to achieve, which is what we think should be able to achieve around being able to kind of work anytime, anywhere, not having to work in an office, but having that flexibility that we've grown accustomed to since the pandemic. Of course, there's caveats, and these can vary by industry, regulation, and their size and the culture, but that's kind of where we sort of see that base foundation level, that content adequacy starting. Does anybody have anything to add into this? Right. The next phase then, and sort of following on from what Simon was talking about, the second phase is a productivity. So, how do we establish good communication? And that's two-way communication. People being senior management being able to talk about the priorities of the organization, the department heads and team leads being able to talk about the priorities, so that that people are aligned to those key key priorities. How do we communicate that? How do we communicate what's going on in the organization across the organization, not just to people working in the office or people working remotely, but also to those on the front line, working in the hospitals or in ports, who don't necessarily have a desk at home or in the office. So there's various aspects of Microsoft 365 which enable that. And then also then the other side of the communication is being able to for the people in the business to be able to feed back to their line managers, to the senior management, to be able to kind of create that two-way communication so that they can tell people what's going well, what's not going well, and suggest how the business can improve. Also, then we've got in the second phase, we talk about expanding that governance, that risk and compliance competency. So introducing more areas around, now we've got all this content in, how we can protect those assets and make sure that we are taking that journey further on. And then we've got search in here as well, so people need to be able to find content. So making sure that we're putting effort into that. And then, very important in productivity is how we can start leveraging these tools to improve our business processes, automating key business processes, and enabling people to do their day jobs and do the important things within the organization. And that caveat is still applies. So I guess we're coming sort of towards the end and opening up for some conversation. Does anyone have anything to they'd like to bring up on what we've talked? Are we completely wrong? Does this not make sense? What do people think?
I think our overall goal with this week's session was to give people ideas about where do they go next. So I asked in chat, but I'd be interested in what does everyone think? Does this give you ideas about how to communicate with your organization? Does it give you ideas about what to do next? What questions does it cause? We put them all to sleep.
No, this is this is Andres. So we kind of try to consult some of our clients into this Teams sort of SharePoint maturity model, modern organizational collaborative architecture, and struggling to communicate that to organizations. And we're starting to see a story develop around some of the tools, and from a bookending the two tools, just the beginning with the governance and a naming convention. And I like to think of starting with the naming convention so that people put together this organizational structure and understand that they need to define it because most of them don't have it. And then at the end, tool, that Defender for Cloud and the app governance license, and to show people that's the destination of this whole journey, because at some point you kind of get cut out of that journey and then they feel it wasn't designed properly or built properly. But until you get to that final Defender for Cloud and app governance configuration, the journey isn't over. So just wanted to see if that's a proper way to approach it with clients or with an organization, and just get your input.
So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, absolutely having having that information architecture to decide which department areas we're going to create for sharing information resources across the organization, which Microsoft Teams areas are we going to create for those departments, and then maybe those internal teams so that they've got collaboration areas. I think that's is certainly where I would see you'd start, and that's kind of what the sort of the content adequacy is sort of alluding to. And then I guess the levels of security. That's I don't know. I'm not sure about some of those cloud apps if that's something you would start with, but that's not something I get involved in, I suppose.
I always think it's interesting how any one of us sees the whole marketplace very differently based on what we do and sort of who comes to us for advice, right? So I think like Simon just said, I don't know what some of those things you just listed off actually are, but if people are coming to you for that expertise, then obviously they're looking to get better at either infrastructure or security from the sounds of it. So they've already expressed a need to, do better at this. What they may not have is framework, sort of a framing for, well, how does that fit with everything else? In the maturity model, we take we try very hard, though it's not always easy, to take an application or service agnostic view and try to really talk about what are the business goals. Why would you even do this? And what does a higher level of maturity in this sort of area of discipline, in that competency, actually look like? What does it get you? So if those are the things that you're hearing people ask you for, then using the framing of the competencies that are relevant, I think, might be helpful. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, in the whole approach of the why now, which is a good starting point, and from a feeling perspective, the right way. The question's always building that framework architecture around their organization, understanding what are those regulatory compliance requirements they have to meet, so that while we're trying to put them in this mature model and sort of get that organizational personality out of it and out of them, and then build a maturity model around the organization, right, and give it back to them. The tools we use to then meet those compliance and meet those automated compliance requirements. Yes, the tool would be Defender for Apps and the app governance. But to your point, that's maybe a 400, 500, but starting at ground zero, starting at 100, pushing them to 200, but having them build that architecture to get to 500 much quicker than building something that their current maturity level and then rebuilding it again as they mature and rebuilding again and again and again, right? So hopefully trying to shortcut that maturity growth. And that's somewhat of the objective from how I bookended one tool to the last tool, but that's probably the hardest way to do it, just because you have to work with the client and work with their level of comfort and the infrastructure they're using. So like I saw a comment on 2FA and when do you do that? From our perspective, on a technical level, you do that at day one. Like 2FA is just on, because that's, the organization doesn't have to be structured maturely yet, but that's the biggest defender to any disorganized or unstructured architecture that's already there, right? Anyways, that's all.
I think another benefit of starting at the 100 level, like you were talking about, is kind of like when you start a task list and you've got a couple easy tasks that you can check off quickly. Yeah. There's something to be said for taking things on at kind of a harder point where you're like, I'm kind of hitting my head against these kind of bigger things. So I did post in the chat, but I mean, starting at the 100 or starting with those quick win areas, I think can give you a lot of kind of momentum within your organization to say, let's start down at the bottom and let's see what we're doing right. And then let's notice what those small things that are kind of laying around that are easy for us to pick up and win are, because then we can take that, we can celebrate those wins, and now we can go up to the next level and we can say, okay, let's do for this next level what we did with the first level, but everybody's already kind of got that momentum and that strength from solving those first levels, that now it's a little easier to kind of progress up the chain.
I think also it's quite good to look at the levels 100 and 200 and you go, actually, we're not so bad. We've already done that. We're more mature than we or somebody told us we were. So that's a helpful thing, is to give yourself a pat on the back and then not spend time fretting about those things. Go off and do something else where you are actually pretty bad. And the 2FA thing is an example of that. There is an argument to be made. I probably won't make it, but there's an argument to be made that 2FA is not the answer to all security issues, and even if it is, I know, but there might be other things which are more important. There's no point in having great security if your production line's on fire. So let's go and sort the bit out that's actually the real priority, because right now I don't have to worry if somebody hacks into my email because the production line's on fire. So I think it's really trying to keep that perspective across the business. Yeah, the security people are going to think the security stuff really important. Legal are going to be absolutely terrified about anything that looks like a compliance issue, and the production operator is going to be worried about business processes. And you've got to try and take a balanced view across the whole organisation. Thank you.
That's got some great questions in the chat, which I know each of us are trying to answer. Does anybody want to come off mute or talk some more? Ask a question. We're all we got two dialogues going on, which is great. Kevin?
Yeah, I put a chat in there about the kind of why. It's always the classic start with why conversation, and I just wonder if it had come up before of the notion, because there's a lot of opinions in the maturity model, and I generally agree with most of them, but kind of having almost a link back to other articles that say, here's why we think governance is a good thing, here's why we think you should be measuring and doing these things. It's not just our thoughts, here's the backing to it. And I always kind of link it back to, I love the Work Lab site from Microsoft, because it goes into the why and uses the evidence and numbers from it. I realize it feels almost like a next level of maturity for the maturity level, to kind of go to that level of depth, but just wonder if it had been touched on before.
Yeah, we absolutely are trying to think from the why perspective, right? It's not just do these things and then you'll be able to check off some boxes, like a certification kind of thing, which I'm not a huge fan of certifications because they don't prove anything. It just means that you've checked off some boxes. I think that the why comes from what your organization needs. We've also tried in the competency articles, and I mentioned in chat, if we're not doing this well, please help us or tell us where we're missing. We've tried to talk about what you get if you're good at this particular competency. I think we in each article have a section, and I didn't look, so I can't remember what the title is, but there's a section that says something like business benefits or,
benefits
ROI or, yeah, that's it. I knew there was a header that we agreed on. So we try to talk about that. If we don't get at it well enough, we would love input. And that doesn't mean that section has to be the place that goes. If there's a why article that you think is missing, we're absolutely game to add it to the whole content.
I guess I'm thinking of kind of links almost on each of the sections to be able to jump, and maybe it's I have to admit that was slightly lazy scrolling to get to the point there, but why would you want to go from level 300 to 400? What is the additional jump that you've got and that benefit? I don't think you're going to get down to return on investment directly from that, and I don't think we should, but where are you going to see that most bang for your buck almost?
So the competencies to each of the competency levels have an impact section, which gives very high level justification for what you would see if you were doing it at this level, and you can imply the benefit from going from one level to the next from that. Again, we were somewhat reluctant to try and write a comprehensive review of that because the documents are big enough already, and B, a lot of those benefits are very specific to the needs of the organization, their strategy and industry and all that kind of stuff. So when we played around with that, it became more or less impossible for us to write it. But in the same vein that you might take the straw man we showed earlier and produce an industry or a business specific version of that, and then we could share that back out to everybody. It'd be great if people said, "Oh, but I work in the sustainable energy industry," because that's one of my pet subjects. And in our industry, going from this level to this level on this competency delivers these benefits. And our why is it makes the world a better place. That would be great for us to hear back from the community and feed it in. We can associate those with these competencies.
Yeah, I think one of the other things to think about is, these articles are, we wrote them to hopefully work for any industry. We're trying not to pigeonhole ourselves too much. Part of that means that we have to be broad and vague. That ideally you're taking, if you're actually going to take some of these ideas and use them in your organization, you might take one of these articles and rewrite it or edit it to match the specific set of goals that you've got for your organization. In fact, that I would think that would be more productive, because you could have names of your own systems or names of your own departments in the article to make it real for the people who you're taking along on the journey. So maybe that's another thing that we could talk about, is how to customize the competency thinking to your specific organization. I'm not sure that we have the workshop, the article about how to run a workshop and some tools and materials behind that, but not necessarily how to reframe the competency articles for yourselves as you're doing your thing. See a hand up, Thomas.
Hello. I thought I put something into this pot of conversation. So very interesting. Loving all this. Just to think about adequacy, what comes to mind is the idea of appropriateness, or I think Simon used the term like creating a sort of a balanced approach. And from my experience, I'm obviously, as a consultant, not the one who can make a judgment or can make a decision for the organization. So what's usually helpful is to present things on a spectrum and then let them know what the consequences and maybe the pros and cons might be. So for them then to make a sort of, call it an empowered choice almost. And so just as an example, what I clash with the more security-minded people all the time, and we spoke about MFA just for a reason, is so as an information manager or sort of a collaboration champion, my attitude usually is be as open as possible and only as closed as necessary. While the people on the other end of the spectrum, they would say, let's be as closed as possible and only as open as necessary. Yeah, and I imagine that neither my position nor the information of my infosec here is right or wrong, but in the context of appropriateness, somebody who runs the organization needs to make a decision where to be on that spectrum. Because if you're too close, you stifle collaboration. If you're too collaborative, you're sharing information you shouldn't be sharing. But ultimately, it's a judgment call which our customers have to make for themselves, and in a sense, we're helping them to make the best decision. So yeah, that's just what came to mind while looking at your slides and hearing your conversations.
There's some great points.
I think that's the end of our time. Simon, you want to go to the final slide? I've got a bolt. Thanks, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for a session. We'll be back on February 21st at those times, 3 p.m. in the UK. And there's a set of links there to get involved with the maturity model. Appreciate all the discussions. Been really good. Lovely to hear all the chats going on, and have a good rest of the day. Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.